There was a day, somewhere in the deep, mostly unrecorded past, when the balance quietly flipped. Not a single dramatic afternoon with a clear before and after, but a slow accumulation of small advantages that eventually crossed an invisible line, the line separating a species that survives a landscape from a species that controls it. Before that line, humans were not the dominant force in their environment. They were, by most measurable standards, a mid-tier participant in a brutal ecological hierarchy, sharing space with animals that could end a human life faster than the human nervous system could finish processing that the encounter had even begun. This is the story of what changed, why it changed, and what got left behind in the process. For most of the deep evolutionary past, the title of apex predator belonged to something else entirely. Cave bears, direwolves, saber-toothed cats, and short-faced bears occupied the top of regional food chains across multiple continents. Animals built with the kind of raw mechanical advantage that made direct confrontation with early humans a mathematically poor decision almost every single time. Humans were fast enough to occasionally evade, clever enough to occasionally avoid, but not remotely equipped to consistently win. What humans had instead was something almost embarrassingly unglamorous by comparison: throwing accuracy, sustained group cooperation, and an unusually flexible brain that could plan several steps ahead of an immediate threat. None of these traits look impressive next to a 7-inch canine tooth or an 11-foot standing reach. But traits don't need to look impressive to be decisive. They need to compound. The first major shift came with the spear, and more specifically with the realization that a sharpened point launched from a distance changed the entire risk calculation of a hunt. Early humans had been opportunistic for a long time before this, scavenging carcasses left behind by larger predators, picking off weak or injured animals when the odds briefly tilted in their favor. The thrown spear didn't make humans stronger, it made proximity optional. For the first time in a very long evolutionary history, a human didn't need to be close enough to a dangerous animal to risk immediate death in order to potentially kill it. This sounds like a small mechanical detail. It wasn't. Distance changes everything about a confrontation between a soft-bodied, slow-healing primate and an animal built around claws, mass, or 6-inch teeth. A spear thrown from 15 feet away meant that even a failed attempt didn't necessarily end in death. It meant a second attempt was possible. It meant retreat was an option that didn't require outrunning something faster. The entire physics of the encounter, the same physics that had been relentlessly unfavorable to humans for hundreds of thousands of years, started shifting in small, accumulating increments. The second major shift had nothing to do with weapons at all. It had to do with talking. Coordinated group hunting existed in other species before humans refined it. Wolves hunt in packs. Lions sometimes hunt cooperatively, but human coordination operated on a different axis entirely. Other social predators coordinate through instinct, repetition, and a relatively narrow set of evolved behavioral cues. Humans could coordinate through language, which meant they could plan hunts that hadn't happened yet, communicate roles before an encounter began rather than improvising them in real time, and adjust strategy on the fly based on information shared verbally rather than purely through observed behavior. This is the difference between a group of predators reacting to the same stimulus simultaneously and a group of predators executing a plan. A herd of mammoths driven toward a natural hazard wasn't an accident of multiple humans happening to chase in the same general direction. It was a designed outcome discussed and agreed upon before a single human got within sight of the animals. Coordination at this level meant that the effective hunting unit was no longer a single human body with its very real physical limitations. It was an entire group functioning as a single, distributed predator with no equivalent biological limitation on its numbers. Fire changed the equation again, and arguably more profoundly than either of the previous shifts. Control over fire didn't just provide warmth or cooked food, both of which mattered enormously for human physiology and brain development. It provided something almost no other species at the time could claim: a portable, reliable deterrent against animals whose entire evolutionary history had never encountered anything like it. A short-faced bear evolved over millions of years to deal with cold prey animals, rival predators, and terrain. It did not evolve any instinctive response to a controlled, contained burning light source, because nothing in its evolutionary history had ever produced one. This mismatch mattered enormously. Predators that would have confidently approached a human campsite at night under any other circumstance now faced a stimulus their nervous systems had no template for, and animals without a template for a given stimulus tend to default to caution rather than aggression. Fire didn't make humans stronger than a cave bear. It made the cave bear's evolved confidence less useful, which functionally amounted to nearly the same outcome. These three developments, distance weapons, coordinated language-based planning, and fire, didn't operate independently. They compounded. A group of humans with spears, a coordinated plan, and a firelit camp at night represented a fundamentally different threat profile than any single one of those advantages alone. Megafauna that had spent millions of years calibrating their behavior around the physical capabilities of individual prey animals were now encountering something that didn't fit any of their existing calculations at all. This is where the slow climb toward apex status actually happened. Not in a single triumphant confrontation, but in thousands of small cumulative pressure points spread across tens of thousands of years and multiple continents. Each individual encounter where coordinated humans successfully drove off, outmaneuvered, or killed a large predator or competitor shifted the odds infinitesimally, repeated enough times. Across enough generations, infinitesimal shifts become structural ones. The fossil and archaeological record shows this shift correlating with uncomfortable consistency with the timing of human arrival across multiple regions. Wherever humans expanded into new territory, megafauna populations in that region began declining within a timeframe that lines up suspiciously well with human presence, far more consistently than climate change alone would predict in isolation. This doesn't mean humans single-handedly wiped out every large prehistoric species through direct violence. Climate shifts, habitat changes, and competition for resources all played overlapping roles. But human pressure applied consistently and compounding across thousands of years appears again and again as a significant contributing factor in extinction patterns that climate alone struggles to fully explain. There's something genuinely strange about sitting with this history honestly. The same species that spent the overwhelming majority of its existence as prey, as a cautious, easily killed participant in a food chain dominated by animals with structural advantages humans can never match physically, eventually became the single most consequential extinction pressure most of those animals would ever face. The short-faced bear that could have ended a human life in a single four-limb strike didn't go extinct because humans got physically stronger. It went extinct, at least in significant part, because humans got collectively smarter, more coordinated, and more capable of projecting force without ever needing to physically outmatch anything. This is, in a sense, the entire story of how humans became the apex predator, not by winning fights, but by making fights increasingly unnecessary, and then by making survival itself increasingly difficult for any species whose existence depended on a world that human activity was steadily reshaping. The transition wasn't instant, and it wasn't experienced by any single generation as a dramatic before and after. A human living during this multi-thousand-year shift would have had no sense of living through a turning point. They would have simply noticed perhaps that this year's hunt went a little easier than expected, or that the bears near the river seemed a little more cautious than the stories from their parents' generation described, or that a particular dangerous stretch of land that older relatives once described in tones of real fear didn't seem to carry the same threat anymore. What's left of this transition today is mostly indirect evidence, extinction timelines that correlate with migration patterns, butchered bones-bearing tool marks at sites where megafauna remains accumulate, and the simple, undeniable present-day fact that humans now occupy a position at the absolute top of essentially every ecosystem on the planet, with the primary threats to human life having shifted almost entirely away from other animals and toward other humans, disease, or the consequences of human activity itself. It's worth sitting with the strangeness of that outcome for a moment. For the overwhelming majority of human evolutionary history, the threats that mattered were external, immediate, and physically overwhelming. A creature with more mass, more teeth, and no interest in negotiation could end things in seconds, and there was very little a single human body could do to change that equation through strength alone. The actual solution that worked wasn't physical superiority. It was the accumulation of small, unglamorous advantages, distance, coordination, and control over a previously untamed natural force, compounding slowly enough that no single generation noticed the shift happening, until eventually, almost quietly, it already had. There was no announcement, no final confrontation that settled the matter definitively. Just a long, slow accumulation of advantages until a day arrived, somewhere in an unrecorded past, when the species that had spent its entire existence avoiding becoming prey had, without any single dramatic moment marking the change, become something else entirely. Have a happy day.